My guest today started their career flying Black Hawk helicopters for the Australian Army, did that for a decade, and is now head of AI and automation at Immutable. So one big career pivot there. Man, welcome. Lovely
Thanks.
to have you here.
Great to be here. Yeah, it's definitely not a typical career from every angle I hear.
Let's start with the Black Hawks. What was it like flying Black Hawks for the military?
I mean, it was like my absolute privilege. Ever since I was a kid, it's all I ever wanted to do. I grew up in Sydney and I would see the Black Hawks occasionally, very occasionally, flying over, and that was my whole thing. So I worked extremely hard to get there. And the crazy thing was, by the age of 23, I was in the seat doing the job, albeit with a long development path ahead of me, but just an absolute dream to be a young person in charge of one of these incredible machines that is like the Toyota Hilux of the sky that you just feel such a emotional connection to. And every time I see one, it's absolute privilege to have done that.
You mentioned to me just how much helicopters have changed over time. Like, what was the experience of that?
Yeah, look, I wanted to show you something, and I think this paints the picture as to, how fast technology changes and how keeping up with technology is important. But also, I can draw an analogy to like what life is like now with AI. So the picture on the left is me in the Black Hawk circa 2017, and you can see it's fully analog. All the dials are what we would call steam driven. They're not steam driven, but the technology not much different from the 60s, 70s. And then on the right, just 3 years later, in the MRH-90, the Taipan, and you can see a complete different approach to cockpit design and technology. I mean, it was a massive transition for all of us to go from a world of analog into digital, and the change that made for how a pilot operates with the machine was a massive paradigm shift. And this is it's not quite directly the same, like flying a helicopter isn't the same as applying AI in an enterprise necessarily, but the principles apply. It's like the way in which you interact with the system is changing constantly, and things like the human brain's ability to be saturated with information is totally different from the left to the right in this world. And I see that exactly the same in my day-to-day now, with pre-AI world to the craziness we're living in now.
Now, you and I met when I was judging the hackathon at Immutable. I think that towards the tail end of last year, and you were running that day, and then that's when we caught up. And since then, we've been kind of going back and forward on like cool AI stuff you've been building, which has been really fun. And I want to get into that as soon as we can. We're going to do some screen shares and things like that, which will be great. But first, I think there's going to be you're going to have to take people on a little journey, and a relatively quick journey, I guess, from how you got from flying helicopters to working in Web3.
Absolutely. The key sort of conduit moment that happened between the military and my new life is I did an MBA. I did an MBA at UNSW, AGSM. So I smashed it out in a year. And in doing that, in my final semester, I had a project in industry. It was called Strategic Consulting Project, and I did that at Immutable. I was doing it in the world of tokens, so digital assets and crypto assets that Immutable was dealing with, and quickly established myself as able to translate all of the operations things I was doing in the military with this new world of business lexicon that I had learned through the MBA, and applied that in an Immutable perspective. So from there, I was brought on full time and started in what was then our token operations team, or our tokens team. I was quickly the guy that made sense of a mess and brought systems and structure to something that had evolved rapidly like any startup would, and found myself being the guy who had to automate to survive and build systems that reinforced my impact, but also allowed me to increase my leverage because I was a single operator on a massive digital asset financial machine that I had to grow at the same time as operate.
And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that kind of journey from you joining Immutable in this kind of very operations focused role to then now kind of running AI. And it seems relatively logical to me that like the kind of building the system for the organization to help improve operations, like that's a very AI led thing these days. But just talk me through how that's evolved over the last year or so.
I joined Immutable in a pre-ChatGPT world, and it's hard to imagine that is even a thing. And I guess what is good about that upon reflection, though, is I learned automations from the ground up in a pre-AI world, which meant I had to really think about and make smart choices about systems design, but also tool choices. And part of the reason of that was there just wasn't many tools available. And I think cutting my teeth in that very deterministic, heavy pre-AI world has done me amazing things for this world where the design choices are infinitely more complicated because of the capabilities of the tools underlying. So yeah, I became the guy in the finance operations function, building all these things, increasing my personal leverage to the point where people outside of the finance function were going, hey, can you come and sort of internally consult to the other corner of the business to help us level up the way we do things in an autonomous fashion? And then all of a sudden, what starts to creep in is this growing AI LLM technology piece that I could apply onto existing things and make them 2x, 3x, x faster or more efficient or flexible.
Well, maybe you could just show us an example of one of the things that you've built at Immutable.
Absolutely. So one of the challenges I've had recently is how do we roll out Claude and Claude Code specific training to everyone at Immutable? One of the problems that comes with that is you have this skill gradient where you've got the non-technicals in various elements of the business and the more technical in, say, the product engineering design. To bridge that gap, you have to think and be really smart about what that first project is for people. Where we landed was what the analogy I use is like a sourdough starter. So we give everyone a sourdough starter so they can bake bread. What do I mean by that is, what's the single best thing you can give someone at the company who's new to these tools or this world, who's probably only got baseline LLM chat window experience and is venturing into the world of agents and workflows and tasks and skills? Well, we were like, let's give everyone a digital twin so they can have a sort of carbon copy of themselves in Claude form. And that way they can build and grow with that alongside them. And that's going to be their entry point into whatever functional specific projects they're going to start to build. So I can show you that. Let's dive in. The amazing thing that was, I used to teach everyone, I taught the whole company at Aden and how to build workflows in that world. And the learning curve was just too steep to really make breakthrough across a large portion of the organization. So Claude changes that completely. Here's an example. So I was able to give everyone a Claude.md file, and that Claude.md file had rich information on the company's strategy, short-term OKR goals, etc. They don't have to think. They just go to co-work in this instance, which I found to be the nice balance between the technical people and the non-technicals, where you still have the benefits of doing complicated functions on your computer versus some of the limitations, avoiding some of the limitations that come with just using the chat. So you give everyone this file, it sets up a very complicated file structure that is just done for them and sets them up for success. But the power move was that I can shape it so it asks them the right questions. And I've got a pre-baked one here I can show you. This is it setting up into the file structure, and it's just called Aden Digital Twin. From there, what it does is ask a series of really pointed, contextually rich onboarding questions. So it asked...
Why don't you speak them out just a little bit, just in case people can't read the screen, if people are just listening?
Absolutely. So first section, about you. What's your role and title at Immutable? In this case, I have picked an example. I'm an IC specialist. What's your time zone? Eastern Standard Time, Sydney. What do you do each day? What's your number one priority? Then it goes on about understanding your business and where you fit into Immutable's stack. What tools do you use? What would you like to be connected with? Then it goes, who else is on your team? Who should I know about? What's the best way to communicate with them? Then it goes, what are your individual priorities, goals, and projects? So it can learn about those. And it asks a few questions about your communication preferences. Do you like bullet points? Do you like long form? Whatever it is. And then I'll skip ahead to, once it's thought about all those questions and taken on board your answers, it will fully initialize itself as your digital twin. Again, the user didn't have to set up any of this themselves. They simply got asked questions. They were given a file. whacked it into Cowork, and were asked a bunch of questions. And here we are. They've got it fully set up. It's like, okay, cool. We've got it set up, but now what? How do they use it? So they go to Cowork and they have a project like this, and they could ask it basic questions, and it's contextually rich. I think people have already started to experiment with this in non-Claude environments with projects and sort of keeping chats organized. But the real breakthrough is in things like this. So Immutable has a AI fluency framework that I designed. So no matter where you are in the organization, you have a goalpost to shoot towards in terms of what we think good looks like in your department and at your skill level. So
how did you put that together?
It feels like an age ago. And it's actually crazy how quickly the fluency goalposts need to change as the technology evolves. I took inspiration from lots of different sources out there on the internet and conversations with people and peers across companies in APAC and also the US. Fundamentally, though, what I learned was that the leadership, and particularly leadership contextual to what part of the business they operate in, so like your head of engineering and your head of people, have a totally different expectation of what good looks like. And we don't necessarily need those two pillars to be operating at the same level of fluency because it's relative to what they do in the company. So working with them and keeping them up to date and owning their fluency framework is the most important thing I found.
That makes sense.
But here's an example. Like my digital twin, it knows about me. It has all the history of my conversations with it. It has a pretty good understanding of how good I am at AI. So let's ask it, okay, here's my fluency framework. It's describing what it's about. And then I want you to add it to your context folder and then upskill me. So let's run it. And what we're doing now is across Immutable, whilst this demo runs, is handing this out so people can start sort of this self-reflexive learning journey with their own digital twin. So one of the most powerful things is this ask user question experience in Claude. So it's here, it understands that I'm, in this particular example, working in the GTM and group function, in the operations team. What best describes the area I want to improve in? So I'm going to say, I want to equally focus on the stuff I do for the group section of the business and go to market. And it'll step through saying, okay, how do you rate yourself against the different pillars of the framework, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes this like interactive journey. And think about extensions to this. Run a weekly task on a Friday to prompt me about how I used AI this week and how I could do it better next week. Things like that start to flow once you've built the core context correctly.
I've actually found scheduling tasks, and this is a thing that's just coming through in Claude and Cowork now, to be one of the most effective ways of actually driving automation through the business, because so many things have to happen on a schedule as routines, and kind of removing the cognitive burden for people of doing these things is so valuable as well.
Definitely. I mean, on cognitive burden, there was something else I wanted to show you, and it sort of draws back to my military examples. Again, so here's two relevant images of me being absolutely saturated with information and trying to understand what the best information is at the right point in time so I can do the mission. But here's a photo of my desk today, yesterday, actually. It's honestly starting to get to the point where the parallels between being saturated with information in a cockpit with 5 multifunction displays, each with hundreds of subpages hidden behind menus, etc. And I used to teach human performance optimization to aircrew. And one of the things that comes up all the time is that humans are single channel processors, which means we can only truly focus properly on one thing at a time. But what we're seeing happen now with this trend of Claude and Claude Code is, and as you can see on the screen, is you can set yourself up with, I don't know, on my anti-gravity in the middle there, you've got 3 Claude extensions, a Gemini 3.1 off to the right-hand side, multiple terminals running on the bottom. You really start to hit the balance between what is maximally efficient and what is information overload. And in the last few weeks, I've been experimenting with this, and I'm actually shocked how much it brings me back to my days as a junior pilot, trying to go, okay, what's actually relevant to me right now and what should I be focusing on? And the best pilots were always the ones that knew where to look in the cockpit when to get the best information they could. And typically where that would set them apart is at night on night vision goggles when it's the hardest environment to be flying, but you know when and where to look to get the information you need to achieve the millionth task you've done in the last hour or so.
I really am living this at the moment, this experience. And I can see it with my colleagues as well. Like, just because you can have 8 agents running at the same time doesn't necessarily
Yeah,
mean you should, because you end up doing kind of 8 things poorly rather than just like
yeah,
getting one thing done at a time.
yeah. It's like bolognese. It's an exercise in restraint. I've found you shouldn't be adding too many things to your bolognese. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of lessons learned, things you've got wrong. Like, if someone's just starting on this journey today in their company, what mistakes should they avoid, or how should they get the foundations right?
Yeah. When we first started this journey, I had a conversation with our CEO, and a lot of that was about what should we be building in what order. And where we landed was the opportunity cost of building the wrong thing is just so high right now, because time invested in the wrong thing and like these long gestational projects that soak up time, money, and effort, so much evolves outside of you doing that in other areas that can be more important, that the opportunity cost is very high. So one thing I'm really glad that we did when we started down this path was identify the biggest obstacle, constraint, bottleneck that made sense to apply then our limited AI automation resources towards. And for that, that was GTM engineering for us. So that was bringing to bear AI automation to our go-to-market stack. So I think making sure you're building the right thing, because the cost of building the wrong thing is higher than it's ever been before. Similar to that is, in some instances, it's just better to let AI systems come to you. This is sort of the build, borrow, buy equation, right? Letting those systems come to you where it matters and not building and having to deal with the burden of maintaining them over time is a choice that I'm being.
What you mean by that is essentially just like buy software from other people rather than trying to build it yourself.
Totally. Like the example I have from the early days is, I remember when we had one of our chiefs of staff looking at which is the best meeting, recording, transcribing software. This is in a world pre-Gemini. We use Google Suite, so Gemini just automatically transcribes and sends action items now. But we spent time and money thinking about what third-party system we wanted to buy. Where if we just had the foresight to go, okay, let's think about how AI will come to us and how these systems will come to us and focus on what matters more, then that's a much better application of scarce human time and resource.
And so when we carry on,
The other one would be doing the archaeology. So I call it workflow archaeology, which is before I would be brought into a team in the company, and for good reason, it's like, we need to make this thing faster, better, stronger. Let's bring AI to bear on it. What mattered more was the ability for myself and the team to do the archaeology, dig up the assumptions and the way things have been always done in that team, and truly understand those before then thinking about how to optimize, how to accelerate the cycle time, how to add AI into the mix. Because if you just automate the existing process, you're just making faster mess, or like you're making more bad stuff faster. What matters more is going back to first principles and cutting away the stuff you don't need, and then automating once you've proven that it works.
And so we originally set up this video because you sent me something that you'd built, which was off the back of Andrej Karpathy's auto research concept, which he dropped on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. And you kind of went away and built your own thing and sent it over to me. And I was like, oh, this is so good, but we need to share it with the world. Would love if you could kind of dive into that and share a bit of an example of like, what is it? Why did you build it? And what are you using it for?
Cool. So I saw Karpathy's stuff and I was like, this is the way, right? Having things working on autopilot, particularly this problem of like systems improving in perpetuity on autopilot. This is something I tried to crack in the Aden world in the pre sort of Claude breakthrough era that I just couldn't get right. And when I saw auto research, my brain just went, this is perfect. So I took that as inspiration and shaped it in a way that was directly applicable for a constraint I was facing, which is I've got all these skills now that do stuff that are valuable for me in my Claude environment. How can I leave work in the evening, have it run and improve the system whilst I sleep so that I come back in the morning or on whatever schedule you'd like, and the thing is better, right? So what I did was design a version of auto research that's focused on evaluations and in particular evaluating skills and improving those skills over time. So for those interested, it lives in a repo on my GitHub. It's called Auto Evaluation. Here it is on the screen. And it's best described in this really simple diagram, which is you analyze the weakness in the system, in this case, the skill. You modify the skill. You produce samples of test cases that you can evaluate that skill against, decide whether you keep them or revert back to the old one, and analyze again. So what this loop creates is, and on autopilot, is the ability for your skills to grow on a schedule and get better automatically. Now, one of the things I had to bake into this, though, was sometimes people don't have 10 hours or 10 days to optimize the loop. They want it done in 10 minutes, or they want to go nuts and do it over a month. That is also baked into this thing. So you can have really long loops, really tight feedback loops. And I've done that through a setup wizard. The other thing I wanted to show you is seeing it happen on a Claude Code terminal is one thing, but actually understanding, and this is the human in the loop part, is what's changed? How has it progressed over time? And that's why I've built this visual element, which spits out a dashboard that shows you the progression of the skill and its scoring metrics over time. So let me just quickly run through this one. So this is a writing style skill that I use, also in that repo if you want to have a look. It turns AI slop into actual decent English with no M bars, and it's not X, it's Y language that we all know and love. Here's a demonstration of a approximately 2-hour evaluation loop on that skill. And the magic of evaluating skills with an auto research style system is, as long as you have an observable, quantifiable metric, you can optimize around that metric. In this particular example, I've used a whole bunch of them. You've got human score, task accuracy, quality, banned words, like number of banned words per run, how many M dashes it found, etc., etc. And you can see from the start to the finish how its composite score evaluated itself and improved over time. What you can also see is across a bit of a heat map of the baseline versus best case and the experiment history. So in iteration 1, was it a keep or a discard? And what did you do to evaluate the change? So what this means is, say I ran this at lunchtime and I came back and I came back and I could see my skill is in a better place than it was when I left it. Now add the next layer of complexity, which is up until yesterday, a GitHub action, because schedules didn't exist. And thanks Claude for shipping that today. But you can run this on autopilot with a GitHub action that triggers it at 3 a.m. in the morning. Or now you can run it via a schedule and integrate it into your workflow however you need.
Nice. And what are some examples outside of the writing example of tasks that you would look to kind of evaluate and improve in this way?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many. How many skills do you have running in your Claude environment right now?
I don't know. Somewhere between 30 and 40, I would guess.
Exactly, right? And how many of those skills do you lean on daily? So writing style is one that gives me value every single day.
Yeah.
Exactly. So whatever is in your core stack of daily use tools, those would be my first targets for this, because the compounding benefits you'll get out of improving the things that you use all the time will be much bigger than improving something you use infrequently. I guess that the kernel of the issue is an observable, quantifiable metric. Where this starts to break down is using one LLM to make qualitative assessments of another LLM's output. So like, is this good is different to how many M dashes did you illegally produce in that set of text?
Which really is just how do you design good evals?
Totally. And this was something up until, I mean, at least I had this breakthrough that was very, very difficult. It used to be based on golden data sets that you'd need to produce and say, okay, this is what good, bad, ugly looks like. And I'm going to take that, send it through my system. And it was quite a manual, iterative, slow process that you couldn't set on autopilot because the systems just weren't ready or capable enough to do that.
And so if someone was watching this and wanted to get started, they're kind of non-technical, they want to get to the point that you've got to, where would you recommend they start?
I mean, it's a steep learning curve, particularly because how fast this stuff moves. It's almost a full-time job to keep up to date with the releases of how fast things are coming out. And I fully expect that to continue because the shops pumping this stuff out have increasingly more horsepower behind them, using their own, getting high on their own supply, as it were. So I would start with a digital twin. If you're new to the world of Claude, and what I mean by that is not just the fact that Claude is currently arguably the best model to be using, but also the best environment to be playing with, because, and this is why it's been such a powerful takeover of the world's AI mentality and sort of like conversation, is because simultaneous to releasing the best model, they also broke the paradigm on what an agent was and how you created one and how easy it is to share context between them. And this running joke that everything's just markdown. So everything can be turned into markdown and made agentic. So I would start, if you're new to this, with a digital twin, because you know yourself. You can do a thing called reverse prompting, which is what I demonstrated earlier, where it's asking the questions of you and it's extracting the information that you already know that's in your head that has typically been very difficult to translate into building something previously. And what you'll start to learn is that it's kind of building itself because you're just shaping it in the right direction. And that is your sort of breakthrough moment that you can then go, if I did that with my digital twin, then what would it look like if I revolutionized my daily financial reconciliation? Because I developed this skill over here for my digital twin to help my writing style. What if I developed a skill that did a third of my reconciliation for me, the preamble or the data prep? Those kinds of sort of synapses start firing and you can start doing translating the assistant style work into economically value adding commercial operations, for example.
I'll do another shameless plug for our Claude co-work course, which you can find on the Airtree website in the open source VC section. We have built this so that you don't have to. But yeah, it's the kind of the whole purpose of that course is just getting people to like understand what's possible and think in those frameworks. What would you be building right now if you could? Like if you weren't talking to me right now, what would you be building?
I'm currently obsessed with the idea that we leave so much time on the table. And what I mean by that is we've had this breakthrough moment with Claude and Claude agents and Claude Code that I think about the hours between me stopping work and starting work the next day, and that being completely untapped and ready to be utilized in a new way that it's never been used before. So I'm currently obsessed with all things round-the-clock operations. And part of my mandate now at Immutable is to think about the operating system of human and AI together to maximum effect, right? One of those areas that I immediately in a lever tree get to is, look at all this time we're not doing stuff. What can we do with that now? And you can sort of see the theme emerging where it's like, oh, he's working on things that work whilst he sleeps. He's doing things that he can come back to in the morning and, value has been added overnight whilst he slept. Those types of round-the-clock operations ideas is kind of my current obsession.
That's so exciting. I mean, it's wild to think you've come from an industry or I guess a profession where really it's like do one thing and do it extremely well and like relatively fixed, relatively static to like a very quick evolution to a kind of profession that is in like constant flux where almost like you are in charge of your own leverage. And for me, that's what's been so powerful about this last kind of 6-12 months is watching some individuals who I get to interact with just enormously increase the scope of what they're capable of doing on a daily basis. And I feel like you're one of those people. I mean, where would you like to be in 6 months? And what do you think is reasonable in terms of like the scope of leverage of one individual?
I ran an interesting experiment on this particular narrative last week. I took all of the work that I'd done in Claude that week on a Friday, and I said to it, I want you to look at all of the work in my chat histories and repos that I've completed over the last 5 days and give me a score in terms of my human output. And then I want you to benchmark me against a similar level person at top FANG companies. And like never before have we been able to get such a rapid feedback loop on how am I going in terms of pure output. I mean, there are some limits to that evaluation, but what you start to see is what has become the new normal is the sheer amount of volume an individual can pump out. And that was pretty much at the level of, mostly chat-based, some co-work stuff, working on concurrent projects in the background on Claude Code. Those types of comparisons are mind-blowing. Like, I highly recommend yourself and the viewers to give this a go. And like, if you've built a week's worth of context or a few days worth of context in a chat histories or like multiple chats, ask it to evaluate yourself and give you feedback on the ways in which you could increase that leverage. Now, I think about in 6 months' time, more, instead of just that leverage being me doing stuff on these interfaces, what are the versions of me or the agents that I run with also doing parallel to that? And Claude has nailed the parallel execution piece that I think is like mind-blowing. When you ask it to do something, it goes spinning up 3 agents to do that for you. Like, imagine that, but running all the time doing your stuff. And it quickly becomes a management orchestration problem rather than a can the technology do it problem.
Something I'm trying to fit into my life at the moment that I definitely don't have time for, but I really want to do is just have like a side hustle where I do the one person business thing where you kind of have an agent for marketing and for support and for everything else, just to see kind of how far you can push it these days. I think if I didn't have kids, that's what I'd be doing in the evenings or weekends.
Yeah, for sure. And there's limits to the model. Like, I think you can bake an organization in a folder kind of thing and run it on Claude Code, but you'll hit limitations quickly with context windows and I'd love to do the exact same experiment and see how far you can take it. But what starts to become the problem is like managing the synchronization of effects.
If anyone wants to get in touch with you for advice or anything else, where can they find you?
Awesome. Adenman.com, my vibe coded website. Please head there. I've actually got an agent on there that's sort of trained on my recent experience in GTM engineering. So you can ask the AI version of me questions if you want to, if you don't want to reach out in person. Otherwise, hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to chat about all things AI implementation at enterprise grade level, particularly GTM engineering.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Aden.
All good.
Look forward to catching up again soon.
Sweet as. Thank you.